Hi, welcome back to the Listen and Grow podcast, the podcast where we keep it real, we keep it gay, and we keep you informed on everything happening in the LGBTQ plus world. I'm your host, Zach Randles-Friedman, and we have a packed episode today. We're talking about a brand new LGBTQ treatment center opening in Chicago, a powerful art exposition that almost didn't happen, Meta getting canceled for censoring lesbian content, the Orange convicted felons, DOJ, declaring LGBTQ protections, and I quote, anti-Christian, school districts in Illinois now under federal investigation, and so much more. So buckle up and grab your coffee, your tea, or your cocktail, or whatever gets you through this news cycle these days, and let's get into it. First, we start in Chicago, where the new LGBTQ plus treatment center is opening. There's some genuinely good news, and we're going to need it today, trust me. A brand new LGBTQ plus affirming addiction treatment facility has opened on Chicago's North Side, and it is right in the heart of the community. We are talking about the corner of Halsted and Belmont, which if you know Chicago, you know is the queer neighborhood. And this is No Matter What Recovery, and they just held an open house this past weekend. Now, this is not just any treatment center. This facility is specifically focused on the LGBTQ plus community, and it treats substance abuse, mental health, and this is important, sexualized drug abuse, and also known as chemsex. And this is a real and serious issue in the community that does not always get the attention it deserves. One of the people at the open house was Bryce Bellevue, a 27-year-old who battled a crystal meth addiction and spent years in and out of treatment. He found recovery through a No Matter What recovery program in Los Angeles, and he said something that really stuck with me. He said that is the first time he had found a truly LGBTQ plus affirming environment, and that it completely changed his entire life. He said he was surrounded by peers who looked like him, talked like him, and had similar stories to him. I mean, that's huge. And they were all healing together. And now he is helping other people do the same thing. Bryce told NBC Chicago that bringing this program to the Midwest is so important because had it existed when he was struggling in Southern Illinois, he believes he would have found care so much easier and more quicker. That is powerful. This is what community does. And that center's chief clinical officer, Jessica Steinman, pointed out that people in the LGBTQ plus community are statistically about twice as likely to experience addiction compared to the general population. And that is largely due to the real trauma that comes with being part of the queer community that has only been kind to us. That facility offers individual therapy, group therapy, and programs designed to support the whole person, mind, body, and soul, in a space where clients can be their full, open, and authentic selves. No Matter What Recovery officially opened its doors Monday, and this is the kind of story that reminds us why representation in healthcare is not just nice to have, it's literally life-saving. I love these type of stories. It makes me so happy. Next, we're moving on, and this one has layers. The Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art has finally opened its first ever exposition of African LGBTQ plus artists. The show is called Here, Pride and Belonging in African Art, and it is described as a colorful, vibrant celebration of queer life, exploring themes like joy, family, and belonging. But it also doesn't shy away from the darkness and loss because that is the full reality of what it means to be queer, particularly in parts of Africa, where being LGBTQ plus can still be criminalized or even dangerous. The show features nearly 60 artworks, paintings, sculptures, textiles, photography, video, and film, representing artists from more than a dozen African countries, with a strong presence from South Africa, Nigeria, and Kenya, as well as other artists based in the United States, Britain, and France. Now here's where it gets complicated. The show was originally supposed to open last June to coincide with Washington, D.C.'s World Pride celebration, and then it was abruptly postponed. The museum cited budget issues, but let's be real. The timing of that postponement, right in the middle of Orange convicted felons administration, putting Smithsonian institutions under a microscope, did not go unnoticed. There was a strong feeling in the arts community that LGBTQ plus content was being silenced, particularly celebrating African queer voices, because that combination, Black, African, and LGBTQ plus, was seen as politically inconvenient for this administration. The fact that the show is now open and now seeing the light of day is a statement. Art persists, queer stories persist, and this exposition is proof that you cannot erase us, not from history, not from the walls of museums, and not from cultural record. If you're in DC or planning a trip, put this on your list. It sounds like an absolutely amazing show. Next, Meta mishandled lesbian content on Instagram. So let's talk about Meta because they have some explaining to do. Meta's independent oversight board has overturned the removal of an Instagram post celebrating lesbian relationships. And they issued a pretty sharp rebuke of the company in the process. Here's what happened. A Brazilian Instagram focused on lesbian visibility and culture posted a carousel of images celebrating older lesbian couples. The text reflected on how generations of queer women had their relationships minimized, dismissed, and hidden, treated as just friendships rather than real romantic partnerships. The post included the phrase in Portuguese, I'm not even going to try to say this, but I'll try it. Toda sapata e uma potência, bad Portuguese, I'm sorry, which translates to roughly every dyke is a force or every lesbian is powerful. Now, the word sapato has historically been used as a slur against lesbians in Brazil, but this is crucial. It also has been reclaimed by LGBTQ plus communities as a term of pride and solidarity. Context matters and reclamation matters as well. Meta flagged the word and removed the post under its hateful conduct policy. The user appealed and the oversight board stepped in and said Meta was wrong. And they didn't just say it quietly, they warned that Meta continues to repeat errors when moderating queer self-expression online. Repeated errors. That's right. This is not a one-time mistake. This is a pattern. It is a pattern that disproportionately affects LGBTQ plus users, particularly women, particularly queer women of color, and particularly people in communities outside the United States who express that their identity in their own language and cultural context. The Oversight Board got this one right, but it needs to do better because when you silence lesbians celebrating the women who came before her, you are not protecting anyone, you're just erasing. Next, Orange convicted felon. DOJ calls LGBTQ plus protections anti-Christian. So buckle up because this one is a lot. The Orange Convicted Felons Department of Justice has released a 197-page report from something called the Task Force to Eradicate Anti-Christian Bias. And this is exactly as alarming as it sounds. The report declares that pro-LGBTQ plus policies from the Biden administration are, in their words, anti-Christian. It argues that protecting queer and trans people somehow violated the religious freedoms of Christians. And it lays out a vision for the federal government that is, there is no softer way to say this, Christian Nationalist. So let me give you some of what this report actually says because you need to hear it. The report claims that flying pride flags at U.S. embassies was anti-Christian. It claims that recognizing Transgender Day of Visibility in 2024 was anti-Christian. And yes, that year it fell on Easter Sunday, entirely by coincidence, but the report treats it like it was a deliberate attack on the faith. It claims that reports to protect LGBTQ plus kids from book banning were anti-Christian. It claims that Biden's executive order against conversion therapy, yes, conversion therapy, a practice that has been condemned by every major medical and mental health organization in the country, was unfairly targeting Christian families. And it outlines a list of next steps that include allowing workers and educators to make anti-LGBTQ statements as constitutionally protected religious expression, forcing schools to out transgender students to their parents, allowing faith-based housing providers to discriminate against LGBTQ plus people, and maintaining a tip line for what they call the chemical and surgical mutilation of children, something that report's own critics note is not actually happening. Secular organizations are pushing back hard. Americans United for Separation of Church and State called it unfounded, and the Freedom from Religion Foundation called it a political document masquerading as a civil rights analyst. And I want to point out something important. Joe Biden, the president whose policies this report is attacking, is Roman Catholic. and there are countless Christian denominations and faith communities that are fully and joyfully supporting LGBTQ plus inclusion. This report does not speak for all Christians. It speaks for a particular brand of Christian nationalism and wants to use religious language to legalize discrimination. This is not about protecting faith. It's about using faith as a weapon, and we need to call it exactly what it is. Next, Chicago celebrates LGBTQ plus affairs director Antonio King. So let's come up for air for a second because Chicago gave us something beautiful. On April 30th at the Center of Halstead, which, if you don't know, is one of the most iconic LGBTQ plus community centers in the country, a room full of queer activists, allies, and elected officials and community members gathered to celebrate Antonio King, who holds the distinction of being the first and only director of LGBTQ plus affairs in the nation. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson was there. The whole room was there, and it sounded like it was a genuinely joyful, community-centered evening. King was appointed to this newly created position about 3 months ago, and he was apparently a little embarrassed by all the fanfare. He kept the evening light, and honestly, I love that for him. Mayor Johnson got from the room laughing when he said if he had any doubt he was in the gayest crowd in the city of Chicago, Antonia's wardrobe settled it. That is the kind of leadership representation we deserve. Congratulations, Antonio King, and we see you and we are rooting for you. Amazing. Next, the Orange Convicted Felons Administration, because they were very busy this week. The Department of Justice has opened civil rights investigations into 36 Illinois school districts over lessons that involve sexual orientation and gender identity. 36. The Justice Department's Civil Rights Division, and yes, the irony of the Civil Rights Division being used to target LGBTQ plus protection is not lost on me, announced the investigation saying that they will examine whether districts expose students to sexual orientation and gender ideology content without adequately notifying parents or giving them the ability to opt their children out. Federal officials also said they will be looking at whether schools allow transgender students to use bathrooms, locker rooms, or sports teams that align with gender identity. The school districts targeted span the entire state, from Chicago's Noble network of charter schools to districts in Bloomington, DeKalb, and Ridgeview. Assistant Attorney General Harmit Dillon issued a statement saying the DOJ is determined to end what he called keeping parents in the dark about how, and this is her phrase, sexuality and gender ideology is being pushed into classrooms. Here's what the announcement did not include: any specific book or any specific lesson plans or any specific incidents that prompted any of these investigations. They announced 36 investigations without identifying a single concrete harm to one single child. The governor's office fired back, saying the Civil Rights Division, which used to investigate actual discrimination, is now being used to attack rights and humanity of LGBTQ plus communities. Several school leaders responded with a mix of confusion and defiance. One superintendent said they didn't even know why their district had been selected. Another told families there was no reason to panic and that the district would approach the inquiry with professionalism and confidence in their practices. Illinois has some of the strongest LGBTQ plus student protections in the country, and these investigations, even without formal findings, are designed to pressure districts into rolling back those protections out to the federal funding cuts. This is strategy. Create enough legal and financial pressure that schools police themselves, remove inclusion curriculum, stop supporting trans students to avoid all becoming the next target. We cannot let this happen without it being naming it out loud. And then next, Tennessee is busy and not in a good way. LGBTQ plus advocates across the state are urging Governor Bill Lee to veto a whole state of bills targeting the queer community, and they are gathering at press conferences and speaking out loud and clearly about what is at stake. Let me walk you through the bills. First, Senate Bill 936, the bill would require all state policy to define gender as only two sexes, male and female, based on anatomy at birth. And this is not just a policy statement. Under this bill, local governments, school boards, and utility districts would have to revise any existing ordinances that would say otherwise. If a resident feels their local government isn't complying, they can file a complaint in court. If their government is found in a violation and it doesn't fix it within 90 days, they can lose access to state grant funding. Keep not complying, the state starts withholding general fund up to 20% of what a jurisdiction is owed. This is not a physiological debate. This is a financial weapon being pointed at every local government that dares to recognize the humanity of trans people. The bill's sponsor, Senator Paul Rose, said he filed it out of his commitment to his faith, and I'll leave that there. Then there is what's being called the Riley-Gaines Act, or Women's Safety and Protection Act, which requires schools, shelters, and correctional facilities to redistrict access based on biological sex. It named a 26-year-old swimmer who became an anti-trans activist after tying for 5th place in a college competition with a trans woman. And then there is Senate Bill 676, which has 2 parts. One requires any clinic receiving state funds that provides gender-affirming care, including puberty blockers, to also offer detransitioning services. The other part requires the same clinics to report the state detailed information about every patient receiving gender-affirming care, including their age, sex, and county of residence, medications prescribed, and any mental health diagnosis or treatments they receive. That is patient privacy nightmare. That is designed to intimidate both providers and patients into avoiding gender-affirming care altogether. Metro Nashville Council member Brenda Gadd said as plainly at a press conference, these bills aren't abstract. They change how local governments operate and how people experience their communities. She called this one of the most harmful legislative sessions for LGBTQ people in a decade. Governor Lee has already signed 2 bills into law. He has vetoed 1 bill in his entire 2 terms in office. Advocates are not giving up, though, and neither are we. And let's end this episode with something on a lighter note. And I do have something for you. Representative AOC was recently asked by TMZ whether she thought the U.S. would have a female president or a gay president first. And she answered the only way AOC can. We don't know if we've already had a gay president. And honestly, she has a point. Because historians, biographers, and gossip columnists have been quietly and sometimes loudly speculating about the sexuality of several American presidents for a long time. So let's take a little stroll through history. First, James Buchanan, the 15th president and the only one who never married, had a close, intimate, years-long relationship with the future vice president, William Rufus King. They lived together for over a decade. King described their bond as communion. They were rarely seen apart. President Andrew Jackson, yes, that Andrew Jackson, referred to them as Miss Nancy and Aunt Fancy. Make that of what you will. Then we go to John F. Kennedy, was famously Catholic and publicly very married, but his closest lifelong companion was a man named Kirk Lamone Billings, known as Lem, who he met in prep school. Lem ran JFK's presidential campaign, served as an usher at his wedding, and had his own bedroom in the White House. At least one biographer has suggested that the relationship was more than platonic. Then Abraham Lincoln, one of the most beloved presidents, shared a bedroom for years with a man named Joshua Speed. He also slept in a narrow bed with another companion named Billy Green, who gave a rather enthusiastic description of Lincoln's physical attributes. Historians disagree about any of these means, but it is fascinating. And Alexander Hamilton, not a president, but stay with me, wrote a letter to his friends. John Laurens and Lafayette, that were, let's say, very affectionate. In one letter, he described himself as a jealous lover. After Laurens failed to write back, Lin-Manuel Miranda did not invent that tension. It was in that historical record. Now, to be clear, none of this is confirmed. Historians debate all of it. And frankly, the concept of sexuality identity as we understand it today did not exist in the same way in the 18th and 19th centuries. But the idea that all 45 men who served as president were definitely all exclusively heterosexual, probably not. AOC may be onto something, and honestly, the conversation itself is worthwhile because it reminds us that queer people have always existed, always been present, and always been part of history, even if history hasn't always let them say it out loud. And that's a wrap on today's episode of Listen Up Girl. We've covered a lot of ground today. I've gone into a little bit more detail for these stories because we started off with hope and new LGBTQ plus treatment center opening in Chicago's North Side, in the heart of our community. We celebrated Antonio King, Chicago's first and only LGBTQ plus affairs director. We talked about art, about Instagram censorship, and the very joy is speculating whether Honest Abe had a thing going on with his bed buddy. And then we talked about some hard stuff, and we are all still here. We're still loud, and we are not going anywhere. If this episode meant something to you, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Leave a review, subscribe wherever you get this podcast, and you can find me on social media. I'm the real Zach R.E. I love hearing from this community. Until next time, stay informed, stay fierce, and I'll be back tomorrow with more LGBTQ plus news.